Hi, I'm Julie Sweetland from the Frameworks Institute. Thanks for joining the final episode in our online video series exploring research findings and framing recommendations from the Farming and Food Narrative Project. In this episode, I'll be walking through the recommendation to speak directly to historical and contemporary inequities when talking about farming. So when agricultural voices stay out of conversations about social issues, we reinforce the perception that farming is removed from society. Participating in public discourse on contemporary social topics is part of reframing farming as central, not peripheral, to the rest of society. That means it's important for agricultural communications to listen closely to national conversations about race, gender, immigration, and other topics, and not just to listen to those conversations, but to join them. If agricultural voices don't engage on those issues, we are not only missing important opportunities to make farming better, we are also sidelining ourselves from some of the most vibrant public discussions of our time. So what we've seen is that neither the mass media nor agricultural organizations are likely to talk about the exclusion or marginalization of some groups in farming. So, for instance, Frameworks analysis of news coverage and organizational messaging coming out of the agricultural sector found that right now, neither the media nor agricultural organizations are going to talk much about the exclusion or marginalization of immigrants, women, or people of color who are farmers or farm workers. And there are other issues that we could be connecting to as well. For instance, conversations about climate change. Our analysis of public thinking showed that the public readily connects farming to issues of climate change. In particular, people really tuned into the sense that extreme weather, heat, drought, extreme precipitation, etc., created new and different and intense challenges for farmers. So that's an issue where we could be connecting to more readily. There's a little bit of a challenge there, which is we found that when people think about climate change and farming, it to some extent can lead them into a sense of farmers are at the mercy of Mother Nature. There's not a lot we can do. It's really just about, kind of protecting crops and doesn't get, and that means people are less likely to think about the complexity of farming, the complexity of the decision making that goes into farming, and the availability of solutions. So it's important that we lean into this conversation, but do so carefully. And we've got more to say about that in the report. Finally, another thing we can do to talk about social and inequities, both historical and contemporary, is to focus on policies, not people. So we think it's important to attribute responsibility carefully, meaning take care in how we're explaining the causes of behavior, events, or conditions. It's important that we're clear that the goal of equity-focused conversations isn't to place blame on individuals and farmers. It is about finding places to attribute responsibility for inequities to systems and policies. Another thing is to start with history, but not stop there. It's important to connect the problematic realities of today to the practices and policies of the past. In our interviews with the public, we found that most people are simply unfamiliar with the history of discrimination against farmers and farm workers who are women, immigrants, Black, or Indigenous. So it's important that we find places to share this history. People found it very compelling once they heard about it. We can't just stop in the past, though. We need to help people see how even long abandoned practices like land dispossession still affect us today. So here's one example of how to tackle this, how you might take this recommendation and tackle this complex issue in a simple message. So on the left, I have a message that comes from Agricultural Voices, but has some framing challenges. So given the problems facing farming today, from a challenging regulatory environment to changes in consumer tastes and needs, we can't afford to ignore these issues. We need to rethink a range of policies that affect farming and the future of the agricultural sector we all depend on. This feels very much like a communication that was written, by people in agriculture for other people in agriculture, but it is not speaking directly to the social issues of the day that are concerning people, across American society. So an example of the reframe of the different direction we're recommending as one part of this multi-part strategy is to really, talk less about us and talk less about us inside agriculture and talk more about us across society. So here's an example of what I mean by raising those issues and speaking directly. I'm reading here now from the right side, the plain side of the screen. Given the issues we face today around inequality, we can't afford to ignore issues of race, class, or gender in farming. We need to recognize and root out practices that have made it hard for women farmers and farmers of color to own and hold on to farmland. Again, this is just one example. I know, ownership is a issue that cuts across many social groups that are interested in farming. But the point here is to, again, speak directly to those issues of inequity and talk about the things we can do to solve it, bring farming closer mentally to society by really showing how issues that are very present and much discussed elsewhere are part of farming too, and that farming is part of those issues. All right, I hope these strategies are helpful as you embrace and cultivate opportunities to talk about how farming can and should operate differently to address issues of race, class, citizenship status, and gender. If you want to see more examples or the data behind this, check out the report and the companion toolkit. I also hope you'll keep exploring our resources at farmingandfoodnarrative.org or on the Frameworks Institute website. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode and to the series in general. Really appreciate your time, attention, and wish you the best of luck in your framing adventures.